Hi, this is Debbie and today's video takes a look at the new Altenew 36 pan set of watercolours. This beautiful set of 36 vibrant watercolour half pans coordinates perfectly with Altenew's line of inks. They are intensely pigmented and fade minimally when drying, and they are stored in a convenient plastic case designed with space for your brush, and a water brush is included, and there's a palette in the lid for mixing. So let's take a closer look, and then later on I'll put them through their paces to paint a floral scene for this card. For a start, as with everything Altenew produces, great consideration has been given to design and quality. The watercolours come presented in a lovely box with beautiful illustrations, and then details on the back of the colours that are included, which align with the Altenew inks. The watercolours are housed in a sturdy white plastic palette with the Altenew logo in gold script on the front. I've already had a quick play with these and swatched out the colours, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Each half pan of paint comes in its own individual container with a paint name on the underside, and it fits into its own well within the palette. Included with the palette is a water brush, and there's space for more brushes if you so wish as well. I find it good practice to create these swatch cards to fit into my palette. I draw a grid in pencil and then watercolour each colour in its own square. I start by loading my brush with concentrated paint and then drawing out the colour with water so that you can see the different values you can achieve with just one colour. Here's an example using the lovely deep forest green, which would be great for painting leaves. Although there is a water brush included in the set, my personal preference is to use a paintbrush. I've loaded the brush with concentrated paint and then applied that onto watercolour card. I then lightly rinse my brush and continued painting. Each time you rinse your brush, there is less paint and you get a lighter colour. The more concentrated paint is also drawn along with the water and you get a lovely gradient of colour. With my paint swatched out, I'm going to see how they perform when painting some florals for a card. I'm using a variety of Altenew floral sets to create the scene for this card: Build a Flower Coral Charm, Beautiful Day, Garden Treasure and Peony Bouquet. I'm using Archer's cold press watercolour card and placing it in the Misty. For each of the images I stamp, I'll need to stamp it several times to get a good enough impression on the textured watercolour card, so the Misty will keep everything aligned as I stamp. I'm using antique linen distress ink, and this water-reactive ink will blend and fade with the watercolours to leave a no-line look to the final painting. I'm not worrying too much about masking this scene, as the lines really won't be visible by the end. Instead, I'm just wiping away ink with my finger where I think it might overlap another image. Once I'd finally got a nice grouping of leaves and flowers to paint, I attached the card to a sturdy base with painter's tape, and this will help prevent the card from warping. As I continue to paint, let's chat a bit more about these watercolours. They certainly re-wet very easily to start with. You only need a little water and straight away the intense pigment of the paint is there and ready. With some paints you have to really work the water into the paint to get the colour forming, but I'm happy to say that isn't the case with these watercolours. As a card maker who loves to paint flowers, I can see that I'll be using a lot of the colours in the palette. I suppose because these watercolours tie in with the Altenew line of inks, they are already biased towards a beautiful rainbow of options, perfectly suited to painting the flowers that Altenew are so well known for. Quality and presentation are obviously spot on, and you have to consider the price point as well. In comparison to the tubes of watercolour which you could purchase, these would set you back hundreds of pounds or dollars for 36 paint colours. Then the Altenew set really does bring great value. If you haven't already got a watercolour set, then this one from Altenew is well worth considering, especially if you're already a lover of Altenew, as it makes the perfect companion to their stamps and inks. I'm going to play some music while I continue to paint, and then I'll be back with you shortly. I finished off the floral border by splattering some of the leftover paint, and then my favourite splatter of all is a couple of scoops of perfect pearl powder in a mini mister topped up with water, shake it up and then splatter that over the card, and it gives a lovely subtle sparkle. I trimmed the watercolour piece down until it was just slightly smaller than the A2 card base, and then I went in with coloured pencils to add definition. One of the most important things when using coloured pencils is to have a good sharpener. My favourite is the Tagala sharpener, which has a dial allowing you to vary the length of the point. I'm using FABER CASTELL POLYCHROMOS, which I prefer for adding these final details, as they have a slightly harder lead and so hold their point better. In addition, they don't break as easily as Prismacolor pencils do. I added a few white gel pen dots to highlight the flower centres, and then set this panel aside while I worked on the rest of the card. I used the Halftone Everything die and cut from Sam Says Stamp Getter card using the Altenew die cutting machine. This machine is great for sitting on your desk for quick and easy die cutting. I used one of the coordinating sentiments from the Halftone Everything set and stamped it in clear embossing ink on slate card that I had treated with a powder tool to prevent stray embossing powder sticking where I didn't want it to. I then sprinkled on white embossing powder and heat set before trimming to a skinny banner. With all the pieces now prepared, it was just a case of putting the card together. I used Ranger Multimedia Matte to adhere the Everything Glitter die cut to the watercolour panel, and then used foam adhesive to mount the accompanying sentiment. I added foam adhesive to the back of the watercoloured panel and adhered it to an ivory card base, and then finally I added a few sequins and held those in place with Ranger Multimedia Matte. Well, that completes my look at the new Altenew £36 watercolour set, which I really enjoyed using to paint the floral border to this card. I'll leave links in the YouTube description below to the products that I've used today, as well as the link to the coordinating blog post over at limedoodledesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted if you subscribe to this channel. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.